Most people think money stress comes from not earning enough. But often, that isn't the real reason. Money becomes stressful when it has no clear boundaries. When every dollar can be used for anything, at any time, your mind never truly rests. You're not failing with money. Your money just hasn't been organized in a way that lets you breathe. And when money has no structure, it quietly takes away your calm, your focus, and the space to think deeply. Stay until the end of this video. You might start seeing money from a different perspective. There's a quiet truth that doesn't get talked about very often. Most financial stress doesn't come from how much money you make. It comes from how your money is being managed, day after day, without you noticing. You can work hard. You can be responsible. You can even earn more over time, and still feel uneasy around money. That feeling doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't come from a single mistake. It shows up slowly, as a background tension, the sense that something isn't quite under control, even when nothing seems obviously wrong. This doesn't mean you're bad with money. And it doesn't mean you lack discipline. For many people, the real issue is that every financial decision is handled mentally. All income in one place. Fixed expenses, flexible spending, and savings all mixed together. Each purchase, even a small one, triggers a quiet calculation. Is this okay? Will this affect the rest of the month? What if something comes up later? When this process repeats every day, the mind gets tired. And when the mind is tired, decisions don't become smarter. They become faster, just to escape the feeling of uncertainty. This is how financial stress forms. Not because of a lack of money, but because money has no clear structure to guide decisions. Welcome to Financial Awakening. This channel isn't about getting rich quickly, extreme budgeting, or sacrificing the things you enjoy. It's built around a calmer idea, designing a personal finance system that allows money to function clearly, so your mind doesn't have to work as hard. In this video, we won't talk about cutting everything out or forcing self-control. Instead, we'll explore how a simple financial system can replace a lot of mental effort and quietly reduce the pressure that follows money around. If this way of thinking feels familiar in a subtle way, consider subscribing to Financial Awakening. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful, practical conversations about money that feel grounded, not overwhelming. Before we continue, here's a small question to reflect on. When you felt stressed about money in the past, how often was it truly about not having enough? And how often was it about having to think too much before every decision? You can share your thoughts in the comments. There is a quiet kind of fatigue that often comes with money. Not the exhaustion of working long hours, and not even the stress of not having enough. It is the mental tiredness that comes from having to think about money all the time. In modern life, money rarely sits still. It asks questions constantly. Can I spend this now? Will this affect something later? Is this a good idea? Or should I wait? Each question on its own feels small, but together, they create a steady background noise in the mind. Over time, that noise becomes pressure. When all of your money lives in one place, every decision becomes connected to every other decision. A simple purchase is no longer simple. It quietly pulls your attention toward rent, bills, plans, and responsibilities that haven't happened yet. Even when nothing goes wrong, your nervous system stays alert. The human brain is not designed to handle endless micro-decisions. When it is forced to do so, it looks for shortcuts. Sometimes that shows up as avoidance. Sometimes as impulsive choices. Often, it shows up as guilt after spending. This is not a personal failure. It is a predictable response to cognitive overload. Many people try to solve this by becoming stricter with themselves. They attempt to monitor every expense more closely, track everything more often, or rely on constant self-control. But effort alone rarely brings calm. In fact, it often increases tension, because the system itself remains unclear. What truly reduces stress is not stronger discipline, but fewer decisions. When money has no defined roles, every choice demands attention. When money is organized with intention, many choices quietly disappear. A well-designed financial system works in the background, It does not ask for willpower each day. It removes unnecessary friction. Instead of constantly negotiating with yourself, you begin to recognize what fits and what does not, almost automatically. This shift changes how money feels. Spending no longer carries the same emotional weight. Saying yes or no becomes less dramatic. The mind has more space. Personal finance, viewed this way, is not about restriction or extreme budgeting. It is about designing clarity. It is about creating conditions where calm decisions are easier than stressful ones. When the mental load around money decreases, something subtle but important happens. You regain energy, not financial energy, but emotional and cognitive energy. And with that space, better decisions tend to follow naturally. Money functions best when it is structured in a way that respects how the human mind actually works. Not perfectly, just gently enough to allow breathing room. That sense of breathing room is often where a healthier relationship with money begins. When people think about personal finance, they often assume it requires constant attention, tracking every number, checking balances every day, adjusting plans all the time. But in practice, a healthy financial system usually asks for less attention, not more. Its role is to protect your focus, not consume it. A well-designed money system relies on rules that are simple enough to run quietly in the background. When those rules are clear, you don't need to monitor your finances every day. You don't need to question every decision or wonder whether you're doing something wrong. Stability doesn't come from tight control. It comes from reducing the need for control. There's an overlooked truth in personal finance behavior. The more mental energy money demands, the more stressful the relationship becomes. This isn't about discipline or intelligence. It's about how the human brain handles repeated decisions. A good system respects that limit and deliberately removes unnecessary choices. Simple rules tend to last longer than complex plans. Not because they're smarter, but because they're sustainable. When a principle works on ordinary days, it also survives busy weeks, emotional moments, and periods of fatigue. Complexity often breaks down when life gets noisy. Simplicity tends to hold. A system-based approach to personal finance doesn't require perfection. It allows for uneven months. It leaves room for flexibility. Most importantly, it doesn't turn small deviations into emotional failures. When money operates within a stable structure, short-term fluctuations lose their emotional weight. Another common misconception is that effective budgeting has to be highly detailed. For many people, overly detailed budgets create pressure rather than clarity. Constant comparison, checking, and adjustment can turn money into a permanent source of tension. In contrast, a simple structure can create natural boundaries without the need to track every expense. A personal finance system shouldn't feel like surveillance. It should feel supportive. When the most important elements are handled at the structural level, the remaining decisions become lighter. Spending feels less charged. Waiting feels less restrictive. The mental load begins to ease. Over time, something subtle starts to change. Small financial swings stop triggering strong reactions. Decisions about buying or not buying feel calmer. Delaying gratification no longer feels like deprivation. These shifts don't come from forcing better behavior. They emerge from living inside a system that aligns more closely with how people naturally think and decide. When personal finance is approached as a simple system that respects psychological limits, it can become one of the quietest parts of life. And sometimes, that quietness is the clearest sign that the structure is working. There is a common misunderstanding in conversations about money. Saving and spending wisely are often treated as opposites, as if one represents discipline and the other indulgence. In reality, they are not in conflict. They are simply different expressions of choice, shaped by context. Every spending decision involves a trade-off, not between right and wrong, but between different ways of living, between flexibility and commitment, between freedom and ownership, between short-term comfort and long-term pressure. When money is viewed through this lens, spending stops being a moral issue and becomes a personal one. The question of renting versus buying, for example, is rarely just financial. It reflects how much stability or mobility someone values at a particular stage of life. Ownership can offer security, but it also introduces long-term obligations. Flexibility can create breathing room, even if it means letting go of the idea of permanence. Neither option is inherently better. They simply carry different weights. Smart spending doesn't mean spending less than everyone else. It means spending in a way that aligns with your tolerance for pressure. Some expenses look reasonable on paper but quietly increase mental strain. Others, when chosen intentionally, support a sense of balance and ease. Pressure often doesn't come from the size of an expense, but from how locked in it makes someone feel. When too much money is tied to fixed commitments, the future can feel rigid. On the other hand, when a portion of money remains flexible, the mind tends to relax. Not because more is being spent, but because options still exist. Saving, in this context, isn't about denying yourself the present. It's about preserving choice for the future. Spending isn't about breaking discipline. It's about allowing enjoyment within boundaries that feel sustainable. These two ideas don't compete when they exist inside a clear structure. Over time, approaching money this way changes the emotional tone of decisions. There's less guilt after spending, less tension around waiting, fewer internal negotiations. Choices feel cleaner, even when they involve compromise. Understanding trade-offs doesn't eliminate difficulty, but it reduces confusion. It allows decisions to be made with awareness rather than reaction. You're no longer chasing an ideal version of financial behavior. You're responding to reality, with clarity. Sometimes, the most sustainable financial habits aren't built on strict rules or constant restraint. They're built on an honest understanding of what you're exchanging when you say yes to one thing and no to another. And often, that understanding is what makes money feel lighter, even when life remains complex. In the end, the most important part of personal finance isn't the numbers themselves. It's the mental space money either creates or quietly takes away. When money is disorganized, it doesn't just affect a bank account. It occupies attention. It interrupts deeper thinking. It pulls the mind into a constant state of alertness. Decisions in other areas of life start to feel rushed, defensive, or overly cautious, not because people are weak, but because their mental energy is already being consumed by unresolved financial pressure. When financial stress becomes persistent, creativity often shrinks. A mind focused on avoiding mistakes has little room to explore possibilities. When thoughts revolve around staying afloat, meeting obligations, or preventing the next problem, curiosity fades. Long-term thinking becomes difficult. The goal narrows to survival. But when money is structured in a way that supports calm, something subtle changes. Mental space begins to return. Decisions no longer feel urgent by default. They feel intentional. People slow down. They reflect. They respond instead of react. This shift doesn't just improve financial choices. It affects work, relationships, and how the future is imagined. From this perspective, financial freedom isn't a dramatic finish line. It's not about luxury or constant growth. It's about having options. It's the ability to pause before deciding. To say yes or no without fear being the loudest voice in the room. To choose timing instead of being forced into it. A calmer mind tends to make clearer decisions. Not perfect ones, but more grounded ones. And money, when placed in its proper role, supports that clarity. It becomes a tool rather than a constant signal of threat or urgency. At Financial Awakening, the focus isn't on dramatic transformation. It's on quiet alignment, on systems that reduce pressure instead of adding more rules, on approaches that respect human limits rather than pushing against them. Sustainable change often doesn't arrive with intensity. It arrives with relief, with fewer internal conflicts, with a sense that money no longer controls the emotional climate of everyday life. When money is given clear boundaries, the mind gains room to breathe, and in that space, better decisions tend to follow naturally. Sometimes, that sense of calm isn't the result of having more. It's the result of finally creating enough space to think. When we step back and look at money more clearly, one pattern often stands out. Stress doesn't usually come from a lack of effort or discipline. It comes from confusion, from money being asked to do too many things at once, without clear roles or boundaries. When money has no structure, the mind stays busy. Decisions feel heavier than they should. Small choices trigger unnecessary tension. Over time, this quiet pressure reduces focus, patience, and even creativity, not because something is wrong with the person, but because the system around money is unclear. The deeper lesson here is simple but powerful. Money works best when it supports mental clarity. When financial decisions require less constant thinking, the mind has more space to respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally. Calm isn't a luxury, it's a condition that allows better choices to happen naturally. Applying this in daily life doesn't require extreme rules or dramatic changes. It begins with clarity, giving money clear roles, reducing unnecessary decisions, creating boundaries that make everyday choices feel lighter. When money feels organized, life often feels more manageable. If this perspective resonated with you, consider subscribing to Financial Awakening. Your support helps us continue creating calm, practical content that focuses on building a healthier relationship with money, one grounded in clarity, not pressure. Thank you for being here, and for choosing a more thoughtful way to look at money.